welcome. As you can see, the board has not seen each other for a month. It's a lot to catch up on. But thank you very much for joining us today on such an important topic as DACA. And as you know, this board is dedicated to the future of agriculture, and the future of agriculture depends on the training and the youth, and DACA is such an important part of our future. So thank you all for coming from various parts of California to join us today. And if you would please join the board in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Also, I thought if we could just take a moment of silence for those who have suffered. Thank you. And Josh, could we have the roll call?
Ashley Warren. Here. Don Bransford. Don Cameron. Here. Nancy Cassidy. Here. Helene Dillard. Here. Ben Drake. Here. Mike Gallo. Here. Eric Holst. Bryce Lumberg. Here. Craig McNamara.
Here.
Martha Montoya. Here. Joy Sterling. Here. Mr. President, we have a quorum.
Thank you very much. And the minutes from our September 5th meeting were electronically sent. If you have no additions or deletions, so moved by Nancy and seconded by Mike. Any further discussion? All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Thank you very much. And we're very fortunate to have Jenny Lester-Moffett here with us today. Jenny, thank you for your service and an update from the department.
Yes, thank you, and I'm glad to be here as well. I think that September was definitely quite busy here at the department. I'm going to give a very quick update on some of the activities, but certainly that is not comprehensive. First off, September marked the celebration of Farm to Food Bank Month. Ag really stepped up and yet again, there was a substantial amount of donations, 245,000 pounds of food that was donated to the California Association of Food Banks to their Farm to Family program. So thank you to the generosity of those around the table here and to all the farmers who did donate. I think that is, it's an increase over the 2016 donation, and there's a continuous need for donations, so that's pretty fantastic. Secretary was down in Orange County last Friday celebrating Farm to Food Bank month down there. September also marked the end of our legislative session, and Taylor Roshan here in our office is going to give an update from the legislative session. So I'm not going to go in too much detail here and let Taylor take it away, except to say that I am looking forward to hearing and having our conversation today with Mr. Monning on drinking water, and he has Senate Bill 623, which, as Karen mentioned in a note to us all, is definitely a priority that we've identified in Ag Vision. September also did not bring any sort of respite to the invasive species, invasive pests that we have here in the state. Our Ag Commissioners, our Plant Health and Pest Division have been very, very busy. As Karen shared with me, we basically have all bugs on deck at this point. There have been no species really that have at this point not surfaced in the month of September, and actually throughout the year. It's been a very, very busy year with our Plant Health and Pest Division. We now have over 100 trees that have been infected with HLB, all in residential areas. So our staff is working with the locals down in that area on eradication. For dairy milk pricing, Secretary Ross has reviewed the recommendations from the Producer Review Board. There is a ballot that is being prepared, and it should be available mid-October for producers to work on or to vote on a standalone quota program. And we still have no indication on federal action. And One last thing, I'll just update you, and I know Secretary Ross sent you a note. We have some staffing changes at CDFA. Our Undersecretary, Jim Houston, has accepted another position, and last Friday was his last day. We had a really wonderful send-off for him on Thursday, and I think some really kind words. And I'm sure you all get our Planting Seeds blog, but Karen posted a very nice note about the work that he has done on behalf of the departments that he started in 2011. And certainly, as she said, California agriculture is in a much better place because of his vision, his passion for agriculture. So we wish him the best in his future ventures. Finally, I just wanted to say I'm looking forward to the conversations today. I know Secretary Ross is sad to not be here to hear the conversations on DACA, but we look forward to those conversations and hearing what you guys have and your thoughts on that. So thank you so much.
Great, Jenny. And Taylor, would you like to join us and provide us with a legislative update? Thank you. And while you're looking for that, I just happen to have in my notes here that it's your birthday. So happy birthday. Thank you for joining us on that day. Cake will be served a little later.
That's really what this meeting is about. It's my birthday, not anything else. Thank you so much for having me here today. I'm the department's legislative manager, and I want to echo what Jenny said. Jim. And thanks. That's okay. And I'll omit the ones that failed passage for this year. Those bills aren't necessarily dead. They can come back in the 2018 session when the legislature reconvenes January 4th, and I'm happy to come back next year and give you all an update of where those are at. We are also in the process of finalizing our legislation of interest report, which is an annual report we push out at the end of session. We are waiting for the disposition of all the bills that came through the legislature before we publish that. So we should have something around mid-October, and I can share that with all of you and post it online. As you may know, this is the first of the two-year 2017-2018 legislative session, and it certainly was exciting. It went till about 1:30 on the last day of session, so that was a fun evening for myself. Both houses heard roughly 2,500 bills. That's pretty standard for this year's session, and that doesn't include resolutions and constitutional amendments. Of these 2,500 bills, only about 430 made it to the governor's desk. Of the 2,500, CDFA tracked about 10% of those bills, so 250 bills, which is a relatively heavy load for a multi-issue department like CDFA. First and foremost, we had quite a few trailer bills and general bills of statewide significance this year. That includes cap and trade, cannabis, and transportation. First and foremost, SB 92 was approved prior to the summer recess, and it provided CDFA with authority to establish a standalone quota system as California dairymen and processors make the decision to switch to a federal milk marketing order or not. There was a question about the department's broad-based authority to establish that standalone program that Jenny had mentioned, and this bill just clarified that. There were also some inconsistencies in a budget trailer bill from last year. There were certain mitigation measures that were going to be required of recipients from Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund dollars at the department. The intention was to limit those criteria to that who are recipients for the Dairy Digester and Research Development Program. Those are things like consideration of truck traffic and odor. That doesn't necessarily make sense for things like sweep recipients. So SB 92 clarified the applicability of those criteria. AB 109 was the final trailer bill on GGRF passed this year, impacting CDFA. It offered $99 million from the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund to the department for the Dairy Digester Research and Development Program and the Alternative Manure Management Program. This is certainly a lot larger of an allocation than we've received in the past, so we are going to get those dollars out as quickly as possible. We do expect the legislature to reevaluate additional greenhouse gas reduction fund expenditures when they reconvene in January. They did not clear the pot, so to speak, so there'll be ongoing discussions, and I'm happy to report on that in January and February. The legislature also chose to extend the cap and trade program until 2030 in the final moments before summer recess convened. That was through AB 398 by Mr. Garcia and AB 617 by Ms. Garcia. They also passed a constitutional amendment, ACA 1, that I'm sorry is not on the PowerPoint, but essentially it established a reserve fund for greenhouse gas reduction funds by 2024 and changes the vote threshold of how those dollars can be appropriated. In the cannabis world, we had 64 bills on cannabis items, which is certainly more than I've ever seen on a single subject. Perhaps maybe water might rival it here in California in the legislature. But really, essentially, we've had two large trailer bills. The first, SB 94, was passed before the summer recess, and it reconciled the differences between the Medicinal Act, which was passed in 2015, and the Proposition 64, which was passed by the voters in 2016. We, as the administration, made the decision that it is in the best interest of our resource use and our time and energy in this very truncated timeline to have one consistent act that made an allowance for both sort of production types, adult use and medicinal, and we looked forward to implementing those in January. AB 133 was brought at the end of session and just made some small technical cleanup changes to cannabis policy here in California. Once again, along with those GGRF expenditures, I do expect cannabis legislation, perhaps to this scale, to come every year for the next few years, given that we are embarking on a newly regulated market and new issues and problems will arise as the industry feels them and we recognize them. So finally, before summer recess, the legislature also tackled transportation infrastructure issues and funding problems. SB 1, which was authored by Mr. Beal, increases the gasoline and excise tax as of November of this year and creates a new annual transportation improvement fee, which is assessed based on the market value of your particular vehicle when you renew your registration with the DMV. Appropriations Committee estimated that these diesel and gasoline taxes will result in $52 billion over the next 10-year period for local and state expenditures. This also means that we may see more unclaimed gas tax, which is borne by ag producers that will come into the Food and Agricultural Fund to be expended for agricultural purposes. How much is coming in, we just don't know at this point, but the Comptroller's Office and Caltrans makes those estimations in November. A few bills have already been approved by the governor that impact agriculture. AB 1219 by Mrs. Eggman essentially grants the existing immunity protections that are part of the Good Samaritan Food Donation Act to gleaners. Right now, those opportunities are available for restaurant, retailers, things like that, but gleaners are a portion of the industry that needs to be included in that immunity protection. AB 376 by Mr. Chavez requires CDFA, along with Veteran Affairs and the Labor Agency, to post resources for returning veterans who are interested in farming and ranching. SB 243 by Ms. Galgiani increased the budget authority of the citrus program by $9 million. As Jenny had mentioned, we've had increased fines of HLB and HLB positive ACPs. Particularly in Southern California and the residential areas, and our staff and the county ag commissioners really have needed to have this additional budget authority to do some of the activities that they require. SB 335 codified the existing Nursery Advisory Board. This was sort of an ad hoc group that was established by the Secretary, so this bill just codified it in Food and Ag Code. And then AB 861, there was some confusion on what is a county ag commissioner's authority to abate what they would declare a nuisance honeybee hive in their county. So this bill simply clarified their authority to abate Africanized honeybees in the area. There's also quite a few bills that we are awaiting the governor's signature or veto on. These bills have been successful through the legislative process, but Governor Brown has until October 15th to either sign or veto these bills. AB 954 by Mr. Chu, the impetus for this act is really that consumers have some level of consternation in understanding what is a food quality date and what is a safety date. Some industries use by, sell by, best if used by, and the author and the sponsor's estimation is that this leads to excessive food waste. Also, CalRecycle has a goal to reduce food waste by 50%, I believe, at a later date. So the idea is that this bill would require CDFA to encourage retailers, manufacturers, food processors to use consistent terminology when developing these sort of food quality and food safety dates. AB 822 by Mrs. Caballero would require all state-run institutions, so these are things like state prisons, state hospitals, state agencies for that matter. This does not include universities. They would be obligated to purchase California-specific agricultural products if that bid from the California producer is not more than 5% higher than a bid that comes in from out of state. So certainly this will take CDFA and the Department of General Services to work together if this bill is signed to implement it. AB 1348 by Ms. Aguiar Curry would require CDFA to establish a farmer equity position in the executive office. This position would be responsible for evaluating opportunities to engage socially disadvantaged farmers and ranchers here in California in things like regulatory discussions, public outreach, grant opportunities, loans, things like that. We also had quite a few FAIRS bills this year. It seems like every year there's a particular focus in the legislature, and this year FAIRS had quite a few bills. AB 1131 was a bill by Mr. Lackey. It authorizes the JPA at the Antelope Valley Fairground to perform the audit of the DAA. So it's a little wonky in its application. And then AB 1351 was by Ms. Caballero, and that allows DAAs to lease land for affordable housing. AB 1499 was actually a resurrection from last year's AB 2678 by Mr. Gray. I'm sure some of you have heard of it. It would require 0.75% of all the sales and use tax generated on fairgrounds in California to be allocated through the Budget Act to the Fairs and Exposition Fund here at the department. Right now, all that money goes to the general fund as a sales and use tax. So it would create a specific offset that would go to CDFA. We would expend those dollars to fairs for fire, life, and safety, deferred maintenance, revenue-generating opportunities, and some other funding needs. And then finally, SB 5 is a bond measure. There was a competing bond measure by Mr. Garcia, AB 18, that failed passage. SB 5 is related to parks, climate change, and the environment. It does propose a $4 billion bond to be placed on the June 5th primary ballot. If it's approved by voters, CDFA could receive $10 million to incentivize ag management practices related to open space, healthy soils, and carbon sequestration. So some of those aspects are part of our Healthy Soils program we fund now. $20 million would be allocated for our state water efficiency and enhancement program, so that's SWEEP. And $18 million would be available for fair facility improvement. So once again, that measure does have to be approved by the governor and signed off by the voters in the primary ballot. Once again, we will hear about the standing of some of these bills in the next few weeks, and I'm happy to send around email updates to the group on or coordinate with Josh on what's going on with those. Of course, I am omitting one of the most significant bills this year, SB 623 by Mr. Senator Monning. Certainly he'll be here, so I don't want to stand in his spotlight, so to speak. There were also quite a few bills that I didn't mention that didn't have a direct impact on the department, but were some high-profile measures. There was certainly an affordable housing package that was signed, actually I think it was earlier this week or on Friday. That was a huge package and a huge lift by the legislature and the governor's office. And we have quite a few other bills on labor, water, land use, and pesticides. They just really weren't germane and specific to CDFA. That's really all I have for now. I'm happy to answer any questions you guys may have, and then I'll certainly come back next year.
Well, thank you so much. Yes, Martha?
SB 954, that will affect produce itself, the vegetables and fruits and vegetables, is the package?
No, it's only the processed products. So the angle is that we would really be looking at food processors and retailers to augment their labeling practices. There's also some conditions in there that we should help discourage processors in putting consumer-facing, retail-based date markets. So that's something like if you're doing stock rotation, the idea is to not have the consumer misinterpret a stock rotation date with a use-by date or a sell-by date, but not produce, right?
And that's in collaboration with NRDC and Ad Council labeling?
So certainly we would engage them. One of the difficulties of the bill is it charges us to reach out to those food manufacturers and processors that it's not really a part of our purview. That's more the Department of Public Health, because they are the licensing entity for those. But certainly we have relationships with those groups that we would, if we were required to per legislation, reach out to.
Ashley?
I know that Healthy Soils Initiative and the SWEEP didn't get funding as expected. I wonder if you can shed some light on why that is.
You know, I think Jenny may have a little bit more on this. My understanding was there was a series of prioritizations, and it was just something that was missed. So many people had their focus on DDRDP and AMP, and there was an estimation that those SWEEP and Healthy Soils would automatically be rolled into the package for cap and trade, but no party really called it out to say these are important facets, and so it was just something that was missed. Certainly the drop-in the bond is an assistance, and I hope that the legislature, when they reconvene in January, will look at this, and we have some of our stakeholders that will say these are great programs. We're actually going to be having some sort of allocations or awards for Healthy Soils coming up, so we hope to be able to demonstrate, you know, how much we provide and our programs provide. So January, that conversation can happen. Jenny, I don't know if I missed anything on that.
Joy?
Just to follow up on that funding for cap and trade and sweep, will that mean any drop or missing some funding? Will programs be in abeyance?
Not that I am aware of. The way that our Office of Environmental Farming and Innovation is structured, we do have some staff that's fluid between programs. So the $99 million allocation for DDRDP and AMP will be able to support the staffing that we have in our OFE office.
And I'll add to that there has been, in the past couple of years, been considerable funding, especially for SWEEP, and so a lot of the staffing will actually be working on implementing that funding as well. As far as grower applications and funding available for growers, there will be money that is in SB 5, and if that goes through, then that will be available as well. Yes, so right now we just released the last round of SWEEP funding, announced those awards last month, a couple months ago, and so there will be a one-year gap in funding.
Any other questions for Taylor? Well, thank you very much, and we'll look forward to your report. And we're glad that you stayed up late.
It was fun.
You had a lot on your docket there. Thank you for following that. I'm very happy to welcome Daniel Torres back. Daniel, I think the last time you were here was in the spring, and Daniel is the Director of Immigrant Integration in the Office of Governor Brown. Mr. Torres has previously served as the Chief of the Immigration Branch at the Department of General Services. Before his tenure in state government, Dan was the Deputy Director of Programs and New Initiatives at the California Rural Legal Assistance, Inc. So we're very happy to have you back and leading off today's discussion, as I mentioned earlier, of DACA and how important it is to not only Californians but to all citizens across this nation. So thank you for taking your valuable time to join us.
Good morning, and thank you for inviting me back. I think what I'll do is I'll talk briefly about what DACA is, and since I'm the first presenter, others will be going into much more detail about the DACA program, and then talk about why it's significant for California and what the state has done in response to the most recent decision about the DACA program. But just as a refresher, the DACA program was created in 2012, and I've listed the eligibility criteria who would be a DACA candidate. Again, DACA stands for Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. So we're talking about a population of folks who came in as children to the United States. And there's been research that has looked at what the demographics of the population is. And for the most part, we're talking about people who came in the United States before the age of 6. So they grew up here. And they're Americans by many of our definitions of what that means. But to be eligible for the program, a person has to be under the age of 31 when the program was created in June 12, 2012, or June 15, 2012. They had to have come in the United States before their 16th birthday and continuously lived in the United States since June 15, 2007, have been physically present on June 15, 2012, and at the time that they applied for DACA, and had no lawful status on June 15, 2012. They had to have been in school, graduated from high school, obtained a GED, or were honorably discharged from the Coast Guard or Armed Forces. And they could not have been convicted of a felony or serious misdemeanors and not be a threat to national security. In other words, these are folks who were very well vetted to be in this program. In California, there are 749,000 DACA grantees. There are 800,000 total in the country that were granted. So we have an outsized proportion of people who received benefits under this program. So we have a big stake in what happens to DACA and any sort of legislative efforts that are going to try to bridge the most recent decision.
What did you say the national figure was?
800,000.
800,000, thank you.
As many of you know, on September 5th, the president announced that he would phase out the DACA program. So what does that mean? DACA was an executive action. It was based on authority that the president has to exercise prosecutorial discretion. And what that means in the immigration enforcement legal language is that means that the president could say, I know this person's here without immigration status, but I'm going to act as a prosecutor would act and exercise discretion not to enforce their deportation. And that is called deferred action in immigration terms. In federal regulations, deferred action, when someone is granted this deferred action status, the regulations allow the federal agencies to also give them a work authorization card and also give them other benefits in immigration law, including the right to travel in and out of the country, what's called advanced parole. So with the DACA rescission decision, that now means that people with DACA, initially, the government has said they're not going to allow people to come in and out anymore, so the advanced parole benefit is no longer going to be available, which has been a significant benefit for people who are in college, for example, who are studying abroad. Also, it gave people the ability to come in and out of the country with inspection, which opened up other options for them through immigration law. Perhaps they were married to a U.S. citizen. This ability to go in and out again with inspection allowed them to then apply for a family-based visa through a U.S. citizen spouse and get a green card that way. The elimination of advanced parole is no longer going to allow that person to go in and out and come in with inspection. The other benefit is that the person with deferred action could rest more easily. They're not going to be deported, right? That's a protection that was given through the program. And then, of course, the work authorization. The deferred action grant and the work authorization card under this program were granted in 2-year increments. So people got their status and their work authorization, and then they're renewed every 2 years. With the way this program is going to be phased out, these documents will expire on their face, and so depending on when the person got their status, that's when they'll start losing their status. So it'll be an expiration really on a rolling basis. There's one limited group that will be allowed to renew their status one last time. And that's if their status and work authorization card are set to expire by March 5th, 2018. So if they're in that one group that has that expiration window that's coming up before March 5th, they are allowed to file one more time by October 5th. So that's what led to California to act quickly after September 5th and come up with a package to help folks who are suddenly faced with this decision, what do I do now? And given that there was this one last window of a renewal opportunity, the legislature worked with the governor to put together a package of resources that included $30 million in rapid response funding for DACA grantees. $20 million of those funds are to provide legal services. And so working through an existing program that we have that's administered by the Department of Social Services with legal aid contractors, $20 million were awarded to contractors to to engage in outreach and education, help those folks that are eligible to renew their status to do so by October 5th, screen those candidates as well for other immigration remedies. As I mentioned, some folks were able to travel in and out, and that opened the ability to use a family-based visa. There are other folks that may have been victims of crime and didn't realize that they could get a visa as a victim of a crime, and so they're able to go back and do that process. Some studies have said about 15% of the DACA population are eligible for some other immigration benefit, but they're not aware of it. So part of this campaign is to screen folks, have folks come in, talk to our legal contractors, screen them for other immigration remedies, and help them apply for green cards if they're eligible. And then
I didn't hear where the funds came from.
the legislature approved the funds right before recess.
Okay, great.
It happened pretty quickly, and it was in response to the September 5th decision to rescind the program. And the funds may also be used for deportation defense, because there are some benefits that are only available to immigrants in front of an immigration judge. So should a person be put in deportation proceedings after they lose their status, they can then apply for defensive immigration benefit. And this money could be used for that purpose. And then $10 million of the $30 million package was also allocated for financial aid, given that there's this rolling expiration of statuses, and many of these recipients are in college. The idea here is to help them finish their program. And most of the DACA recipients in California are in community colleges. So to the extent that they need an emergency loan to finish up their coursework, this funding would be available for that. We also engaged in outreach as a state office. We work with our Department of Social Services and the contractors that they work with to get the word out that the deadline is approaching for renewals, and that we have a list of referrals for individuals to seek help. And so we put together this one-page graphic that was circulated through various departments. We also created a website, a clearinghouse of resources for immigrants in California. This was already contemplated before the DACA decision, but it all coincided. So we ended up using this clearinghouse as a way to also provide information on DACA. But the clearinghouse provides resources for immigrants in California who are interested in learning English, trying to find adult ed classes near them, who want to find jobs or workforce development training programs near them, or if they're able to naturalize and they're green card holders, to apply for naturalization and find some help nearby. The website is translated into 11 languages, the most common languages in California. And as I mentioned, you use this website as a way to also serve as a clearinghouse for DACA information. So we have several policy and FAQ letters posted on the website from different departments and institutions that may be of interest for DACA recipients. So, for example, someone who may be losing their DACA status and has a legacy driver's license from DMV may want to consider getting what's called an AB60 driver's license, so that they're able to maintain their ability to drive a car and keep their car insurance, et cetera. There's also a program letter from different institutions, K through 12, California Department of Education, the Labor and Workforce Development Agency has posted some information, as well as our Healthcare Services Department. The website also has a list of legal services that are specific for DACA services, and I will share the link with you, so in case you want to circulate this information. It's www.immigrantguide.ca.gov. Again, has referrals for legal aid programs. It has policy updates, and it's available in 11 different languages. And if interested, we've created a banner that you can put on your website, and also have folks just directly click on the banner to get to the website. And that's it. Do you have any questions about the program? Yes.
Thank you. Martha.
Thank you so much, Mr. Torres. 30 million and the website. Have you used our traditional media as minorities read more the print and the radio versus the websites and the internet?
Yes, so most of the outreach is really done by the contractors. And part of the fund includes education and outreach funding. So the contractors are using media, whether it's TV or radio, to get the word out about the renewal opportunities. And many are promoting workshops that they put together using state funds. One of our contractors will be talking today about the work that they've done, including outreach.
Is there a way for me to get the numbers for media outreach? How was it spent?
At this point,
Or how is it potentially
yeah,
going to be
I
spent?
think we can get the allocation of the awards. Right now, the idea is to, because it's a rapid response effort, is to allow the contractors to do the work and then submit reimbursement for what they were able to accomplish. And since we had just a few weeks to get the word out on renewals, we're still waiting to see what the drawdown looks like. But we're also keeping some of that funding open for additional work should there be a change in policy. For example, if there is a realization of the DREAM Act of 2017 and DACA applicants are able to then apply for the DREAM Act, some of the funding that we've allocated this year could be used for those applications as well. So I think at the end of the fiscal year, we'll have a clearer sense of how the allocation was drawn down.
Greg, I'd just like to propose that I'd like to get involved in those numbers because the tendency is to use mainstream media, general internet media, and our Filipino, Chinese, Hispanics definitely trust the local media outlets, meaning the print in particular, because that's what is valid. Websites are scary because they are not validated. But it's like I always say, if you read something from the Washington Post or the Wall Street, you trust that media. When it's sent all over, it's not. So I'd like to make sure that we do engage, if this is so important, to engage knowing those numbers to see whether it's going to the Filipinos, Chinese, Vietnamese communities through those outlets that have been 30, 50, 60 years in the business.
Mm-hmm. And we typically, what we do is during the budget hearing process, report out on the education outreach efforts and what groups we're serving, what languages. That's typically what we do in March and then May again. And this through the Department of Social Services.
So does your office coordinate all of that with the other state offices?
We do. We work closely with the other departments that are overseeing the programs. The Department of Social Services has the program. It administers the program directly with contractors, but we work closely with them or with the legal services.
I wonder if you have a grasp of how many potential DACA individuals there are in the state of California who didn't register. I would assume it's fairly large and nationally.
Yeah, I think there are different estimates. Some have said that they're basically double the number, or 500,000 would have been eligible but didn't come forward. And others have said it's maybe more like 560,000 that were eligible. Other states had a much higher uptake of the DACA program than California did, and there could be there are a lot of theories about why that might be the case, but the numbers I provided are from the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services agency that oversees DACA applications, and these are as of June 30th of this year.
Yeah. Bryce.
Thank you for your presentation. How much funding would you have liked to have received? $30 million seems like a lot, but just $134 per person, and I imagine the need is much greater than that.
Well, let me also give you some more of the backdrop. This year, we provided $45 million in legal services for immigration generally. That just happened beginning July 1st for this fiscal year. So $20 million, we think is the right figure. I think that's going to be, we're not sure yet whether it'll, given the limited window of opportunity to even get the word out for renewals, we're not sure yet how much of that will be drawn down, and the rest will be in reserve for the additional potential changes we might be seeing. Like I said, the DREAM Act, if that does come to become law, then there'll be additional resources there we might need to tap into. But a lot of this is sort of a wait-and-see approach because there are so many potential changes that could happen. There's one presidential tweet that said that the president might even extend the program again. So we just don't know. We want to kind of wait and see.
Yes, I guess I was going to ask that question. The future is totally unknown. Do Do you have any idea of where we may be headed in this? As a nation, certainly California is doing a lot of work to prepare, but it's an unknown.
I mean, that's really what it is. It's just there are too many variables at this point. What we do know is that there is a groundswell of support for DACA across party lines, and we're hoping that people can come together and support the DREAM Act of 2017, for example. We think that is a really good bill for this population. The governor has spoken out on that and has written a letter to the president asking for DACA, for the DREAM Act 2017 to be enacted. But too many variables at this point.
Are California electeds, our congressional electeds, are they pretty speaking with a unified voice on this?
So far, from our perception, yes. I mean, the DREAM Act has been something that many of them have signed on to. You might have seen there were various sign-on letters that were circulated right before the decision, and our congressional delegation, most of them signed on to that, asking for the DREAM Act 2017 to be enacted.
Great. Other questions? Josh?
Hi, Daniel, thanks. Has there been instances yet where DACA, a grantee, has expired and has not been renewed yet?
At this point, there might be some that have not decided to renew, but there are many folks whose applications are still pending. Their status may expire, but USCIS has said their applications are going to be considered, and they would get the opportunity to renew. But we're really going to see the phase out beginning March 6th. There are people whose status expires the day after, so they won't have an opportunity to renew by October 5th.
And is there concern about the information that they provided as part of their DACA application to be used for federal enforcement?
Absolutely. There are a lot of folks who are living in fear because of that. I will say that in the FAQs that the federal administration has put out, they have said they're not going to proactively deport DACA recipients after their statuses expire. But again, these policies have shifted so much. Folks are feeling very uncertain right now.
Well, thank you so much, and we will look forward to staying in close touch with you and your office. And I think count on us, whatever we can do. It's the lifeblood of California and our industry, and we take it extremely seriously. I was sharing with you before the meeting that AgVision takes this issue very seriously as well. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your interest in this issue.
We're very happy to welcome Joseph I. Castro for, excuse me? Oh, we have the panel. I thought I was a little premature on that. Oh, it's double-paged here. Thank you. So we have a panel discussion with DACA Perspectives, and let me introduce our four panelists, and please join us here. We have Daniel Costa, and Daniel is the Director of Immigration Law and Policy Research at the Economic Policy Institute. The Institute is a nonprofit, nonpartisan think tank created in 1986 to include the needs of low and middle income workers in economic policy discussions. We have Deanna Tellefson, who is the Executive Director at the United Farm Workers Foundation, which focuses on civic participation, policy, and research. And we're happy to welcome you back. I know you've joined us on several occasions. And we have Abigail Solis, who is the President of Early Mart School Board, located in southern Tulare County, 40 miles north of Bakersfield. The K through 8th school district serves a total of 1,900 students at 4 schools. And we have Javier Zamora, who is the owner of JSM Organics, located in Royal Oaks, which produces a wide array of produce, fruit, and flowers on the Central Coast. Did we have all of our presenters?
Two of our panelists here since we're early. We'll have Diana go first, and we'll have your presentation come up shortly right here.
Perfect. Thank you.
Can you hear me now?
Perfect.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for having me here. I'm really, really glad that this is a topic that this board is addressing. My name is Diana Televsen Torres. I've been the executive director of the United Farm Workers Foundation since inception in 2006. A lot of the work that we do as a 501c3 organization is geared around helping farm workers and low-income immigrants with community education, immigration, legal services, and advocacy. And one of the policy issues that we've focused on for over 10 years now is immigration policy. So we have a legal department that's staffed by 22 Department of Justice accredited representatives who provide a broad range of different types of immigration legal services. And since we started the organization, we've been able to open over 14,000 immigration cases for individuals throughout the Central Coast and in the Central Valley mainly. You know, it's really spectacular that the state of California is investing in the legal infrastructure in agricultural rural areas. So I want to thank Dan for being here, and also the governor and the state legislature for being able to allocate the funds that are very much needed. The UFW Foundation has 12 different subcontractors that are organizations that are working in the field in the Central Coast, South Coast, and in the Central Valley. So these are organizations that are working with students, providing them information about DACA. We're doing work around citizenship and providing information, outreach, and education around the issue of what are the eligibility requirements for different benefits. And clearly this has been an emergency mode the last few weeks, 3 or 4 weeks. So given the added funding that we were able to get from the California Department of Social Services for DACA, we've had extensive outreach, reaching close to 15,000 people just in the last 3 or 4 weeks. So as Marta mentioned, you know, a lot of the work, we specifically try to target low-income Latino immigrants. So working jointly with Univision, Telemundo, other types of media outlets that do work with the Latino community, radio stations, Q&A on the radio to ensure that the right information is getting out has been an incredibly important aspect of this. We've found that many of the individuals that are calling our offices and our subcontractors' offices are very confused. Many individuals, you know, not even just with the rescission decision, but prior to that, just hearing rumors about the DACA program being potentially ended by the Trump administration, individuals stopped applying or renewing. So I know that there was a question about, you know, our expiration dates being reached now. The answer to that is yes. We're seeing a lot of youth who are not coming to get help with their DACA applications because months ago they heard it was going to end. Potentially, maybe the DREAM Act might happen, so they're waiting. The fear of having the government have their contact information, potentially they've moved so they don't want to provide that information. We're hearing a lot of those stories. You know, overwhelmingly, the number of individuals that we have helped with DACA are farm workers or the children of farm workers. And many of those children also tell us that they work in ag during the summers or on weekends sometimes. This is also a way for them to make money to pay for the filing fee. So we're hearing some really compelling stories about individuals who are very concerned. Just this last week, we had a mother who's a farm worker from Kern County and has been working as a farm worker many years, who has 3 children who have DACA status. And so that obviously is destabilizing for the family. So I know, there's a question about how many farm workers actually are DACA recipients, and that's certainly a question that we've asked ourselves. And the bottom line is we don't know at the national level or at the state level. So I was going to show you here, I only have a few slides, so I apologize here. We have some very recent data that was just sent out by the USC Center of Study of Immigrant Integration. They did a mapping study by congressional district to see how many individuals were DACA recipients in that specific congressional district throughout the country. So what we did is we broke out the congressional districts that we felt were heavily agricultural districts. So this is about 13 different districts here. So you'll see within this, there's also Majority Leader Kevin McCarthy's district, which covers Kern County. So when we add up the recipients, that gives us about 62,300 individuals in these top 13, what I classify as ag congressional counties. The study also demonstrated that what are the universe of eligible people that they thought may have been or are eligible in these districts, and that added up to about 102,000 people. So essentially about 60% of those that were believed to be eligible actually applied. So potentially we have about 40% of the individuals out there in rural California who have not applied. And having just done an outreach event this last week in Santa Maria, I came across a farm worker who never applied for initial DACA, mainly due to fear. So that's something that is not a rarity in our outreach and education.
Dan, I had a quick question.
Yes.
For the recipients that are initial DACA recipients, so that
Yes.
62,000 compares to, Daniel, the 263?
I'll
Is
show
that
you
the
a
same?
slide right now that shows that. So if you look at the bottom of the slide, there's the 223,000 that Dan mentioned. And so this study specifically used different data, and some of that data was the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services data from their last fiscal report, which ended in June. So as we're looking at what I'm calling the rural California numbers, if we were to separate out urban from ag or rural California, rural California would be the 3rd largest state with the number of highest DACA recipients in the country, beating out New York, beating out all of the DACA recipients in Illinois or Florida. And so you can see that this program dramatically has changed the lives of individuals that are in the counties where ag thrives. And so really there's a large impact there. So we might not be able to see exactly the number of farm workers, but from our experience working on the ground with 12 subcontractors in vast regions in ag California, we know that it is a substantial number, and so that it really does impact this industry. So there are a few, yes, Marta?
Okay. Urban plus California, that's your total for California, right? 161 and 62.
Yes, I separated it out.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. So there are a few things that we're recommending that this board could be helpful with. I think one of the issues is, the reality, the stark reality is that we on the ground are telling people that they have to submit their applications for renewals of DACA by today. It is not a postmark date for the 5th. It's actually a received by date. So we're actually on a shorter time frame, and people are still coming in, and we're trying to figure out how to deal with those cases. And the reality is we are going to have people coming in the last day. We anticipate that that's going to be happening. So we really need to be able to help individuals see what are the other immigration benefits that potentially they may be able to apply for, but we also need to do very consistent community education about what their rights are, what are individuals' rights when they're at the workplace, ensuring that employers also know what their rights are as an employer if ICE comes to the workplace, what they can and cannot do, and as an employer, the ability to protect themselves and their employees. So I think that there's 3 things that we are recommending the UFW Foundation. The board could be very helpful, as Dan mentioned. The DREAM Act has a lot of support right now. On the policy level, what we're doing in congressional districts that are in ag areas is trying to ensure that the individuals that are in the congressional offices are actually signing on to a discharge petition to ensure that we can force a vote on the DREAM Act. And so this is something that, I checked last night, and the entire Democratic delegation has signed on in California, but we are yet to have Republicans sign on. So we've been doing a lot of congressional visits with our key Congress members in the Central Valley and the Central Coast to ensure that they understand that support for the DREAM Act means signing on to this discharge petition, that it means that we need to move forward. This is a solution to DACA ending. So something that can be very helpful is that this board can send letters and encourage Congress members to sign on to this discharge petition. Secondly, we have, and I have a handout here from Senator Feinstein's office as well. So we have the Agricultural Worker Program Act of 2017 that was introduced by Senator Feinstein this last May. And so, this is definitely, when we're talking about agriculture, ensuring that professional farm workers have the ability to legalize and to have a path to permanent residency and citizenship is, in our point of view, very critical. So this specific bill is modeled almost entirely from the agreements that were struck on comprehensive immigration reform in 2013. And I know that at that point, 68 senators were able to vote to support that specific bill. The eligibility for the blue card is limited to workers who can prove employment in U.S. agriculture for at least 100 workdays over the last 2 years. And it allows for the subsequent adjustment to permanent status, that's the green card, for workers who remain in agriculture for some time. So this is something that it would be helpful for this board to endorse and support and help push. Lastly, it would be helpful for the board to oppose Congressman Goodlatte's what we call the bracero guest worker legislation. You know, a lot of our allies are totally opposed to this legislation. There's going to be a hearing that's set tomorrow on this issue. We really want to ensure that we are negotiating something that ensures that professional farm workers who are here have the ability to stay. And we feel that that is the stabilization of the workforce that is currently here. I know that the UFW has worked with a number of you who are on this board on previous negotiations, and the unity that has come from those efforts resulted in good things. So we're happy to apply to work with this board and answer any of your questions. Obviously, Senator Feinstein's office is more than happy to discuss this specific bill and see what are things that can be done to ensure that we can do everything possible to ensure that we're stabilizing the workforce for agriculture at the national level. So this is the end of my presentation. Once again, thank you so much.
Why don't we take questions for you right now while they're fresh? Nancy?
Do you have a number on the guest worker bill?
Let me see here. I don't believe we have a number yet. I can send that. I know that they're having a hearing tomorrow. I don't believe that we had it as legislation just yet introduced.
There's a draft on his website.
Yeah. It doesn't have a number.
Deanna, thank you so much. You mentioned early on that there's a filing fee for DACA. How much is that out of curiosity?
It's $495, and in Dan's presentation, he showed that some of the funding that we were able to get from the CDSS actually covers scholarships for that initial fee. So when we announced that, we noticed an upswing on the number of calls and walk-ins that we were getting from individuals because they found out that they could actually get funding to pay for the filing fee. And that's a big obstacle that we see. So we provide the free legal services, but you still have to pay the government to be able to file. So that's something that farm worker families always have issues with.
And you mentioned also the DREAM Act coming up for a vote. When did you think that might be?
I believe we have another panelist that was going to address the DREAM Act. I'm honestly not sure when that's going to be, but part of the issue is that this discharge petition that I'm talking about would basically force a vote to happen, whether the speaker wants that or not. This is an opportunity for as many of the Congress members to be able to let the speaker know that they want a vote on this issue. So we don't really know when that might happen, but we need to put the pressure on Congress members to ensure that as many people as possible sign on.
Helene?
So question, you were talking about the filing and that you wanted to get it done today. It can't be done online then? Or you're worried about the people who don't have internet access?
It's not done online. It's actually a paper form. Okay. Yeah, so you have to, it's interesting. We have to, sometimes we do next day and it still doesn't get to the office at that point. So that's why we were telling people, please come to our office by October 3rd. You want to ensure that your case gets there. And like I said, it's not a postmarked day. So that's a big challenge.
And then for the filing fee, they must have rules on, do you walk in there with cash? Some people don't have credit cards. I mean, how is that being paid?
You have to send a money order or a check. And so that's also a whole process of people do come with cash and you have to walk them through the process. It's and sometimes it's not just a one visit interaction. Individuals come not having all of the paperwork that they need prepared. And so we've really been trying to be proactive with putting out the information of what are the documents that they need to come to our offices or joint events that we're doing with our subcontractors to ensure that individuals have the information that they need. And this is something that through social media, through Univision and other outlets, we've been trying to divulge quickly so that people have the time to be able to come and apply.
And since a lot of these DACA individuals are in college, are you working with the universities directly?
Yes. A large part of our collaborations, we meet on a bi-weekly basis with our subcontractors and with other partners. So for instance, in the Central Valley, we have a very strong relationship with the Mexican consulate, and they have mobile consulate that move around throughout the Central Valley. So they're one of the partners. Education Leadership Foundation is another one of our subcontractors. They work directly with colleges, university students, and so they're a great resource in trying to ensure that various professors and student groups are involved, and we have events actually at the colleges. So we're trying to do our best to ensure that we have a diverse set of stakeholders, school districts. We've had the Greenfield School District in Bakersfield that has sent out robocalls in the past around DACA. So it's really trying to get into locations where we know individuals have trust. And so having those, churches and other locations be able to provide some of that information and affirm that it's important for people not to let their DACA expire is incredibly important. But we're running short on time.
And just one last question relates to what Martha asked about the $30 million that Daniel Torres referenced.
Uh-huh.
Can any of that be used to pay that fee?
Yes. Yes, as of this Friday, we'd helped, the UFW Foundation alone had helped 150 individuals with those scholarships. We will be getting our reports from our subcontractors today because they also are providing checks to individuals and we're reimbursing them. So we should have some final numbers by today since we have to invoice the state on a weekly basis.
Bryce, and then Don Cameron.
Well, thank you so much for coming to share with us, and specifically 3 areas where we can make a difference. Thank you for the information that's on the screen and showing the impact to California's rural communities. Is that information that was given out specifically by congressional district, or is that something that you put together, or do parts of our government track this by rural communities? Specifically, I'm interested in, and I was pleased that it was tracked by rural California, and that rural California really gets a short. Well, we get shorted all the time by the U.S. government. But does the federal government track by rural California?
No, the data here specifically was by congressional district throughout the country. And so what I did was map out what were the congressional districts that had a majority of counties that were heavily rural. This actually doesn't include the Imperial Valley because Congressman Juan Vargas's district includes a bunch of southern San Diego counties, so I actually excluded that amount. So this number is actually probably quite higher, but I focused on the top 13 congressional districts, knowing that, and some of Sacramento is not included because that's also a large urban base. So this is actually, I think, the floor number there, and I think we're constantly looking for data specifically on rural California. One of the one of the important things is that, the UFW Foundation for quite some time was the only legal service, I should say, legitimate legal service provider, because there are many notarios who are scamming people out there, that had the Department of Justice recognition and accreditation to be able to provide these legal services. So working with the California Department of Social Services to be able to have subcontractors allowed a number of organizations who didn't have prior experience, but that we were able to also help to be able to develop that knowledge. So that's been really neat to watch, because the infrastructure now is I'm not going to say it's very strong, because we still have a lot of work to do, but we're seeing, at least in the Central Valley, this is something that's been improving dramatically, particularly in Fresno and Madera County. In Kern County, we're still the only legal service provider that has this accreditation. We found the South Coast, the Central Coast also don't have as many legal service providers as you compare that with Los Angeles. But in addition to that, even the lawyers that are accessible are a handful. And so we really need to ensure, especially as we're looking down the line, should DREAM Act pass, or any other bill, we really need to ensure that individuals are getting the right information, and that they're not really being scammed by individuals that end up getting them deported.
Don Cameron?
Yep, thank you for your presentation. I had a question that really came about with one of our former employees that essentially hired legal counsel to accelerate his process through the system. Do you see that, or I didn't understand exactly why he went that route, except said he wanted to make sure he got through quickly, and we loaned him money to take care of it. But
To get an attorney, you mean? Legal counsel?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there are also individuals that have very complex cases that sometimes prefer to have an attorney or legal counsel that way. There's a number of folks that will come to free events where we have volunteers that are trained to just be able to fill out applications, and then we have attorneys or accredited reps that review the applications. But there's different people decide on different things, and sometimes they want an attorney.
And then Goodlatte's reform bill, can you explain a little bit about that? The guest worker program, I really wasn't familiar with it. So
Sure, and I'd be happy to also send something out. Essentially, this bill, and let me pull out my data here. What our concern is, let me grab this, is that this specific legislation for us really is a non-starter. It would reduce the wages both of the guest workers through the AWER, the adverse effect wage rate. It also really takes out some of the protections that the UFW and the UFW Foundation have fought so hard for in the past. When you look at past agreements that we've had, such as the 2013 legislation, which did at that point include adjustments to the guest worker program. It was a negotiation with both advocates of farm workers and individuals from the ag industry who were having these conversations and negotiated. This is not a negotiated bill, and we're just the language that we've seen in the draft definitely takes out a lot of those protections for farm workers on housing, pay, in particular wages.
But in California, we have other minimum wage and legislation that's already into effect that's going to be increasing our minimum, which we know we're already paying more than minimum. I think most of us are. But so wouldn't that really, for California, really wouldn't affect us or affect the farm workers' wages as much since we already have protection in place?
Currently, the way the H-2A program works is it's specific to the H-2A workers, and it depends on what state they're working in. I think we're looking at it at the national level and seeing that regardless of state, we would see a reduction in protections specific to this legislation. It would be potentially the loss of housing, which to guest workers who are coming outside of the country is a large part of their livelihood. We would see the reduction in wages if the AWR is decreased. So we believe that that would be the case in any of the states should this legislation be brought forward. But this...
No, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
And
I could provide more specifics on that. I know there's a hearing tomorrow, and the UFW president is out in Washington, D.C. this week, also working on this topic. So, like I said, we're definitely wanting to ensure that there's a negotiated option.
Thank you so much for your presentation today. It's always very helpful. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
And we did formally introduce Daniel and Abigail and Javier. If you'd like to join us at the table here, please come forward. And I think I'm going to ask Daniel to lead off. Wherever you feel most comfortable, we'd happy to have you at the podium if you'd like. And again, Daniel Costa is the Director of Immigration Law and Policy Research, and Abigail is the President of the Early Mart School Board, and Javier is the owner of JSM Organics.
Testing 1, 2. Okay. Thanks so much for having me. And I'm very sad that I missed Mr. Torres's presentation, so I hope that I don't overlap too much. But what I wanted to focus on is more based on my work, which is sort of the importance and impact of DACA on the labor market. So thank you, President McNamara, and other distinguished members of the board for inviting me to present today on DACA. As a California Central Valley native and the son of 2 immigrants myself, I'm especially honored to be here. I study and work on labor migration for the Economic Policy Institute, a 3-decade-old think tank dedicated to advancing policies, thank you, that ensure broadly shared prosperity and improve labor standards for all workers, regardless of their immigration status, and that help increase access to decent work opportunities and provide labor and employment law protections to all workers. Since 2012, DACA has temporarily deferred the deportation of approximately 800,000 young immigrants who were brought to the United States as children or teenagers. I'd like to state clearly at the outset of my presentation that DACA has been an unqualified success and has benefited not only the DACA recipients themselves, but the country and the economy and the U.S. labor market. The young immigrants who met the requirements and passed the necessary background checks for DACA were promised by the federal government that they would not be removed from the United States for 2 years at a time, as long as they kept applying to renew, kept a clean criminal record, and were either enrolled in schools or graduated, or serving in the military or honorably discharged. Because of these requirements, we know for sure that nearly all of DACA recipients are deeply integrated into American communities, and especially California communities, because we host the most DACA recipients. President Trump's decision to gradually phase out DACA is tragic and inhumane and will do absolutely nothing to improve the wages and working conditions of Americans. In fact, it will do the opposite. My presentation today will just touch upon the occupations and labor force characteristics of DACA recipients and DACA's positive impact on wages and labor standards. Because my time's short, I won't go too much into depth in any of these topics, but I'm happy to answer any questions and to make myself available to the board and their staff after the hearing. So in August of 2017, the Migration Policy Institute published a report on the education and work profiles of the DACA population, which offered valuable insights about the entire population that is potentially eligible for DACA, which MPI estimates was 1.9 million in 2016, with 1.3 million being immediately eligible to apply for DACA, including those who had already applied for and received DACA. The total number of actual DACA recipients, not the universe of eligible possible recipients, is nearly 800,000, which accounts for about 0.5% of the total U.S. labor force of 160 million. Although the number of persons who are currently enrolled in DACA is a little bit lower, it's actually 690,000 because some former DACA recipients have adjusted to lawful permanent resident status and some have had their request for renewal rejected. The chart up there is from the Pew Research Center, which shows the actual number that have DACA as of September 4th of 2017.
Hold on just a second. So
Sure,
you said that 1.9 million people, what category was that?
That's all potentially DACA eligible people, including people, 1.3 are immediately eligible, but there's another 600,000 who could become eligible if they met certain requirements like the education requirements.
Thank you.
And then of the DACA eligible population in 2014, they accounted for about 1.3% of the roughly 50 million workers aged 16 to 32, and 76% of them were in the labor force, according to MPI. Professor Tom Wong from the University of California, San Diego, along with United We Dream, the National Immigration Law Center, and the Center for American Progress, conducted the largest national survey to date on the economic, employment, educational, and societal experiences of DACA recipients, which included a sample size of over 3,000 respondents in 46 states, as well as the District of Columbia. This was published also just last month, or month before that, at the end of August in 2017. Wong's survey actually found a higher labor force participation rate than MPI found, with 91% of respondents reporting being currently employed, and 93% of those who were over the age of 25 were employed. In addition, about 5% of DACA recipients in the survey reported starting their own businesses after getting DACA, which also jumped to 8% for those over 25. MPI's report also offered new estimates on the occupations that DACA recipients and the DACA eligible population are employed in as of 2014. This is the next chart. Might be too tough to see, but I'm happy to send it to you. The top 5 occupations were in food preparation and servicing, which was about 16% of the DACA population, sales and related services, which was 15%, office and administrative support, which is 12%, construction and extraction occupations, which is 10%, and production occupations, which was 8%. Notably, unlike the non-DACA eligible unauthorized population, who are concentrated in occupations involving much more manual type work, the DACA eligible population is much more concentrated in white collar jobs. This reflects their increased education levels as well as their English language skills. The MPI authors highlighted this fact, noting that the level of college enrollment among DACA eligible workers also underscores their potential future mobility into higher skilled and higher paying jobs. I'd now like to say a few words about how and why DACA has a positive impact on wages and U.S. labor standards. When an unauthorized immigrant receives deferred action or obtains a legal status, we can expect to see a resulting wage gain. For example, previously unauthorized immigrants who were legalized and allowed to become lawful permanent residents under the 1986 Immigration Reform and Control Act saw their wages rise by 15%. The wage gains resulted from the fact that a newly valid legal status or work authorization allows the recipient to access labor and employment law protections enjoyed by U.S. citizens. In other words, they gain access to U.S. labor standards. And because they'll now be able to work legally for almost any employer, they can utilize their skills where they fit best in the economy, as well as work for the employer who will pay them the highest wage that they can negotiate, rather than being limited to working for an employer who will accept fraudulent documents or pay them under the table. Someone lacking work authorization is much worse off. They cannot complain effectively when they're paid below the minimum wage, aren't paid for overtime hours, or when their employer subjects them to unsafe conditions in the workplace. All immigrant workers who are unauthorized are often too afraid to speak out when employers take advantage of them because they know their bosses can threaten them with deportation and use their immigration status to retaliate against them. The impact of this lack of legal status or work authorization is not theoretical. A landmark study and survey published in 2009 found that unauthorized immigrants suffer much higher rates of wage theft than U.S. citizens. 37% of unauthorized immigrant workers surveyed were the victims of minimum wage violations, compared to just under 16% for U.S.-born citizens. In addition, an astounding 84% of unauthorized immigrants who worked full-time were not paid time and a half for overtime when they worked more than 40 hours in a week. The reasonable fear unauthorized workers feel because of their immigration status keeps them docile and quiet, which in turn diminishes the bargaining power of Americans who work alongside unauthorized workers. That's why DACA and EADs, employment authorization documents, are so important for improving wages and labor standards. And the aforementioned study from Professor Wong has helped quantify the value of having work authorization for DACA recipients. Wong's survey inquired about average and median hourly salaries before and after respondents became DACA recipients. The results were also nothing short of astounding. On average, DACA recipients who were older than 25 saw their wages increase 84%, from $10.87 an hour before they had DACA to $20.05 per hour after getting DACA and presumably an EAD. An 84%, sorry if you can't see that, I'll send it to your staff. An 84% wage increase is vastly higher than the wage gains seen for previously unauthorized immigrants who were legalized in a range of studies. This can likely be attributed to the higher again to the higher education levels of the DACA eligible population compared to the non-DACA eligible unauthorized immigrant population. To put this in perspective, the DACA recipients who on average nearly doubled their salaries went from earning just below the poverty line for a family of 4 with 2 children to being solidly in the middle class. They also vastly increased the amounts they can contribute to public coffers in terms of state and local taxes, which in turn help bolster the social safety net for everyone. I'll conclude by just saying that that ending DACA will destroy the educational and employment prospects of 700,000 young immigrants who did nothing wrong, while at the same time hurting the wages and labor standards of American workers. While unauthorized immigrants make great contributions to the U.S. economy and pay billions a year in taxes, it is nevertheless also true that having 5% of the labor market comprised of unauthorized immigrant workers, as the United States currently does, or 9% as California does, only benefits employers who can underpay and exploit them with impunity. Congress and the President must remedy this by legalizing the 11 million unauthorized immigrants and providing them with a path to citizenship. DACA was a good first down payment that worked toward this goal, but ending DACA and forcing young workers out of the formal, regulated labor market will again make them easily exploitable and put downward pressure on wages, which will not help American workers or improve labor standards. Anything the state of California and Governor Brown and the board can do to protect these young workers and allow them to continue being productive will be beneficial to all workers. I'll also just echo what the colleague who spoke before me was saying about about Representative Goodlatte's bill. It really is a bad bill, in my opinion, that would lead to a re-Braceroization of not just agriculture, but a number of other industries, forestry, aquaculture, meat processing, and the impact on wages would be especially stark. It would get rid of the adverse effect wage rate for agricultural workers and replace it with 115% of the minimum wage. In California, for many occupations, that might not be so bad once we get to a $15 an hour minimum wage, but in many other states, 115% of $7.25 an hour would be a terribly low wage, especially in jobs like meatpacking that pay much higher. I'm happy to take any questions, and thanks again for having me.
Well, thank you for your presentation. I think we'll hear from our other 2 panelists, and then we can ask you all questions at the end.
Buenos dias.
Buenos dias.
It is nice to be here. My name is Javier Zamora, and I'm a certified organic producer out of Watsonville, California. I produce mostly strawberries, some squash, peppers, flowers, all certified organic. And I got some strawberries here for lunch. You'll love them. They're delicious. any opportunity that I have to come out here and share my a little bit of daily activities that I go through and what's around me as far as community, it's a pleasure for me to be here, and I feel really blessed that I can at least try to talk to you and tell you what reality is. Versus getting a bunch of data that it's really useful, and I appreciate these people that are here to show you the facts, and they have the resources to show you how important these DACA recipients and what it really means to them. I can only speak for my life and what I see around me and what has happened to me. As an immigrant from Mexico, I came during the early 80s. I spoke no English at all. I'm still working at it. I landed in the LA area and did nothing but the service industry. I became very successful at it, but it wasn't until 7 years ago that I came up north and started farming again in the Watsonville area. I went to college at the age of 43 years old, got my GED, and then I went to college. I don't have a bachelor's degree, but I have couple of AS degrees in horticulture and landscape design and stuff like that. That's all I really needed for me to make a big difference. I started my own business with zero money in 2012. I now farm over 100 acres. I employ about 30 people. I actually grossed just a little over $1 million last year. I do pay my taxes, and the books are there. There are a lot of people around me that have the opportunity, or at least are having the opportunity to perhaps having the American dream as I have. I now feed probably thousands of people out of my farm. That's a very personal satisfaction. This country is beautiful. This country gives you the opportunity to reach your goals, because if you have the passion and the discipline to do it, you achieve as much as you want. We all know that. These kids that came in my area from Mexico, other parts, mostly from Mexico, that their parents came and did some ag work, just out on the fields. They have no idea what issues they're going to face. They're just kids. Now they're being, in a way, stopped all their dreams. These kids are actually the future. There's no more people getting involved in ag, as you know. We're just getting older and older, and there's no young people getting into ag. Who's going to produce the food that is going to feed your grandkids and the kids that are working, creating the new iPhones? Those people need to eat. So, in a way, we have to make sure. I'm no spring chicken. I'm 52 years old. And I have the passion of just growing lots of food for lots of people. So I have to make sure that I allow kids that are in my area, coming from Harnell College and Cabrillo College, that have some ag experience, to come out and see what I do, so they can get into it, and so they can realize that they can also make money. Because you can definitely make money growing food, especially organic food. It's not just that you're just going to make, $10, $12, $13 an hour. My employees make from $12.50 to $18 an hour, and I'm really proud of that. So when it comes to opportunity, I want to make sure that my farm gives the opportunity to my employees to succeed and have a good living. I think by stopping the dreams of these kids, getting rid of their paperwork that would allow them to go ahead in life and go to universities and perhaps travel to their countries in Mexico and see their grandparents, it's not a realistic thing. I think we're looking for a way to, not California. California, I think we have our feet on the ground for the most part. But what is happening in the country is like trying to find a way to just say, this is what I want to do, this is who I am, and I'm going to get it done, without really keeping your feet on the ground and look at reality. The reality is that we need to make sure that these kids have an opportunity to get into the ag industry, or even if some of them are smarter and can go into the Silicon Valley. It's great. You know, there's no limits when it comes to what you want to do when you're able to get an education. For me, going to college at the age of 43, that's all I needed is just couple of years, actually 4 years of the science behind the plan so I can really make it happen and bring my business to a next level. That's all it takes. So let's be realistic. Let's fight what we have to fight. I know I just learned a few days ago there's this bill that a Republican is trying to pass. It probably has some beautiful things. It probably has some other things that are not so good. I don't think we can find a silver bullet to solve our issues. We all know that. We can look at our houses and we all have a little issue that we're having a hard time to find solution for. So my take here is that in my area, there are a lot of kids, especially coming from Cornell College. I can tell you a handful that actually come to my farm and want to learn about food safety. They want to learn how to create a new business. They want to see how I do it. They want to see why and how I was able from zero money to make a business go to over $1 million in 3 years with zero money, my friend. No dinero, but a good passion. And a passion that comes from my father that was a farmer. And I can only think of seeing my father when I was 7 years old coming from the fields with those beautiful fruits. He worked for some American company that I can't remember what it was, but the fruits that he came home with, they were delicious. I really, really appreciate your time, and there's a couple more people that want to say what's going on in your area. I really think that we have to be realistic. We have to stop trying to blame somebody for our issues. And these kids, it's not their fault at all. They were brought up here because their parents brought them over. Yes, I'm sure not 100% are all good, but we all know that. Let's just not try to find one to blame the entire 99. And I hope you enjoy my fresas. They're delicious. They were just harvested this morning, and I thank you very much for listening to my rambling and what I had to say, but it just comes out of my heart. There's no, PowerPoint presentation like that. It doesn't make sense to me. So, muchas gracias.
Thank you, Javier, for speaking from your experience and from your heart and from your passion. We look forward to asking you some questions. And it's very nice to have you today. Thank you.
Okay, good morning. Thank you to the President and the Board for the opportunity to speak with you this morning. My name is Abigail Solis, and I am the President of the Early March School District Board of Trustees. We are a small school district located in the Central Valley, and I appreciate this unique opportunity to not only speak on behalf of my school district, but many other school districts in the Central Valley that are very similar to mine, as in we are a primarily Latino community with a primarily Latino population in our school. We are a farm working community, as many of the communities that are surrounded, that we are surrounded by. Not only am I the president of the Early March School District Board of Trustees, I am also a very active member of CSBA, the California School Boards Association, part of a cohort of trustees from small school boards throughout the state of California that are working together on DACA and other related issues. So I appreciate the time. So quickly, as a panel, I know we don't have a ton of time, so I want to just review a few things with you. I want to go over some basic student rights. I know that as a food and ag board, you probably don't always have the opportunity to learn about public school issues, so I'll tell you a little bit about that. I want to go over current school climate, how schools are responding to this, some DACA data. I know you've already received a lot, but some more. Also the effects that we're now seeing on our school campuses and what we're worried about going into the future, and also quickly review our commitment to educating all students. So you may know that in California, all students ages 6 to 18 have the right to attend school, regardless of the immigration status. School districts are not required to collect immigration or legal status information. If you have a student or had a student in school, you know that we collect emergency information. We want to know parent contact if something happens. So we collect a lot of information, but we do not specifically ask information about immigration status. And also, staff, school district employees, we have rights as well. Schools have the right to limit the disruption of learning, of our learning environment. That means that if ISIS comes to our school district and we are in the middle of instruction, we have the right to say, we're in the middle of a lesson plan. We can't allow you to come into our school district right now. And many of us are using that right to say that and respond that way. Access to student records should only be allowed through a valid court order or a judicial subpoena. Up there I put a quote that was recently released by the CSBA board president. She reminded us that California's public schools pride themselves on welcoming and serving all students, regardless of their race, their socioeconomic background, their gender identity, religion, or citizenship. This has always been the foundation of all of our public schools and will continue to be as we move forward. So this conversation in public schools really started before this whole DACA issue. As soon as the new administration came into office, we started to see signs all across the state that students were experiencing stress at home. So students that were in families of immigrant families, whether they were documented or undocumented, were showing symptoms of stress at school. They were feeling anxious. We were seeing that some students were being bullied by other students when it comes to immigration status. So they were actually telling the students, you know, you go back to Mexico, or now that Trump's here, you're going to go back to Mexico. We were hearing things like that very early on, as soon as the year started in January. So, you know, all this really leads to additional distractions in the classroom, and ultimately it's lowering our academic achievement. You know, this stuff has, and I'm sure you've heard it before when it comes to immigration. We had students that, even though they may be documented themselves, if their parents are undocumented and they have to worry about whether or not their parent will be deported while they're at school, that's the first thing on their mind, and it stays on their mind all day long while they're at school. So it's pretty hard to focus on reading and writing when you're worried about whether or not your parent will be home when you get out of school that evening. What we have found is that in California, schools have responded with an overwhelming amount of support services. My school district, the Early March School District, was probably the second in the state of California to adopt a safe haven policy, one of the many ways that school districts are responding to this new crisis in our schools. So this policy, you know, it just reinforces that our schools are a safe place to be, that if a parent sends their student to our school, they will not be deported or removed from our school while school is in session. And I'm very proud, and I have a copy of this here. We are one of the few schools in the state to actually adopt a safe haven plan. And I have a copy of it here for those who want to see it. In this plan, we not only talk about safety, but we celebrate diversity, and we encourage that throughout our entire school district, our schools will do classroom activities related to culture. They will have a cultural day of understanding in all of our schools. They will teach cultural sensitivity and anti-bullying in classroom instruction. So all of these things have been really helpful to helping this unique, stressful environment that we're starting to see in our school districts this year. So I believe that Daniel cited the same survey that I have here. So of the over 3,000 Dreamers that were surveyed in 46 states, we have some really important data. 91% of those reported that they were employed. And after receiving DACA, 69% got a better paying job. 5%, as stated earlier, started their own business. And very importantly, 65% bought their own car, and 16% bought their first home. Of those now employed, 56% were unemployed before DACA. 49% reported a greater access to employment. 48% reported access to better working conditions. 98% said that they were bilingual, and that their ability to speak 2 languages was an asset to their employer. I thought that was interesting. But more importantly, or very importantly, 45% are in school, 71% are pursuing bachelor degrees or higher, and 28% already have a bachelor degree or higher. This tells us that the students, that our DACA youth are in school, they are part of our workforce, and they're just really good citizens of our communities. You probably heard this morning. Over 220,000 DACA recipients live in California. In the Central Valley, as you know, we are heavily dependent on ag. Just about everyone either works in ag or they have a family member that works in ag. So, they attend families in the Central Valley, whether they are DACA recipients, whether they are documented or not, they attend our schools, they buy groceries at our stores. And they work in ag. If one of these DACA recipients leaves the Central Valley, they're not going to leave alone. You're not going to let your child leave without going with them. So if we have to remove a DACA recipient from our community, the entire family will also leave the Central Valley, which ultimately has a negative impact for us. So I think that's something very important to remember. These DACA recipients are going to school, they are highly educated. However, their families are still working in ag. I put a quote here that I said to someone recently. The decision to eliminate the DACA program targets the wrong population. Why? Because DACA, really, they are our best and our brightest students. When you go to a high school and you see these overachieving students with over a 4.0, when you see these great athletes on our football and basketball fields, there's really no way of knowing which one of those students is a DACA recipient and which one isn't. When I went to school, I went to school with people that were DACA students, and I had no way of knowing until the conversation may have came up. What I have seen is that these young people they're good people. Most of them have no criminal record. As mentioned before, most of them are either in school or have finished school. They're employed and they're contributing to our community. Now, I understand that immigration is a very sensitive issue in this country, and there are some people here that are less than model citizens, and perhaps we have to think about immigration in a different way when we think about those types of people. But DACA youth, our dreamers, they are the kind of people that we want to have in this country. So, schools are having to think about how DACA will affect us in the near future if these young people are forced to leave this country. We are already starting to see a decline in enrollment in our schools, especially in rural communities. In my personal community, we have had the largest decline in ADA, which is average daily attendance. This year, we haven't seen a decline like this in probably over 15 years. So when we noticed that students were leaving our communities, I asked our administration to call each one of those families and find out why they left. And we learned that some simply decided to go back to Mexico instead of wait to be deported. Others just left the community to another area where they felt a little safer. You may have heard that in the Central Valley, we experience raids in our fields where our families are working. So perhaps they decided to go work in another area where they didn't have to worry so much. This is all very impactful for us because less students on a daily basis means less money coming into our schools. We worry that this could ultimately lead to a financial impact, layoffs of our staff, which of course would also mean that people in our local economy would lose their jobs, because most of the people that work in our schools live in our local communities. Less money in our schools means that we have to eliminate programs like athletics and after-school programs. And talking with this issue, about this issue with the cohort of school board members that I'm a part of recently, they even brought up the fact that, after you lose a certain amount of students, you're forced to close the school because it's just not necessary. They can go to the neighboring school. So all this can ultimately lead to school closure. All of these things are very negative impacts for our communities and things that we want to avoid. I like to show this slide because I'm very proud of our Tulare County Sheriff's Explorer program. I'm a member of the Sheriff's Public Outreach team, so I know a little more about these types of programs. But in my community of Early Mart and the neighboring communities of Pixley and Tipton and Alpaugh, our youth get to be part of a Tulare County Sheriff Explorer program. These are young people from the community who go through a training to potentially become part of the Sheriff's Department. And as you see here, there's males, there's females. They participate in these annual competitions with other counties throughout the state of California. And the picture's a little blurry there, but in that big group, there's a mixture of students, of young people from my community. Some of them are documented, some of them are not, but there's really no way of knowing. Those that are documented and have legal status, like Hector up there, his mom is pinning him or giving him a hug as he became hired through the Sheriff's Department after he went through this program. He's one of the fortunate that actually has legal status and was able to get hired, but not all of those in the picture were able to go through that same experience. So what happens here is there's opportunity to all, but then when it comes to being hired, it's not the same opportunity. Did it turn off? So this sensitive issue, of course, is a very political issue. And I have a quote here from our congressional representative, David Valadao. He said, "I will continue to advocate on behalf of dreamers. America is the only home these young people know, and I will do everything in my power to ensure those who were brought here at no faults of their own are not unjustly punished." David Valadao is a Republican. So this tells us that this issue it has support on both sides of the aisle. This is not just an issue that Democrats support. I think representatives in the Central Valley know how important DACA is to our workforce and to the families of the Central Valley. Ultimately, California schools want this board and everyone to know that we are committed to educating all students. We want to promote and achieve academic greatness in every student. We are committed to providing a safe and inclusive environment, and we're committed to every single student. And we'd like to fulfill our commitments without having to worry about any consequences of doing that. So some of the things that local school districts are doing right now, since the decision of DACA, is we are writing letters to our congressional representatives, and we are urging them to champion not only DACA, but a true path to citizenship for our young people. And we're urging our county board of supervisors and the surrounding counties to do the same. And I would urge this board to consider doing the same as well. Thank you so much for your time. If you have any questions about how DACA is affecting California rural schools, I'm happy to answer. Thank you.
Thank you, Abigail. Thank you for such an important presentation, all of you. And Deanna, would you like to join the group here so we can ask you questions together? I know the secretary and I, several years ago, visited some of your schools in the Pixley area that you suggested. So that's part of your school district?
It's a neighboring school district. It's literally 4 miles down.
Yeah, we were very impressed with what you were doing in that area. So thank you for your great work. I also know that Barbara Grimm and Grimway has been very involved, I believe, in your area, and maybe on this issue as well. Have they been supportive? And
I haven't heard recently, but
you can use the.
I haven't heard I don't know about how vocal they are recently about this issue, but I know that Grimway and a couple of other farms, they have our community residents work for their farms, and they have this incentive program that every employee that works there gets to choose the school that they want to give back to. So what the company does is they actually take a very small percentage of every paycheck. I'm not sure how they determine that, but as a result of the employees that choose the Early March School District or the Pixley School District, every quarter we get a check from Grimway or from whatever farm because their employees that live in our community chose our school. So we don't know much. We just know the checks keep coming, and we're happy to receive them. So yes, they care.
Other questions for our panelists here who've done such a great job? Martha.
Does anybody have the percentages of background of our DACA kids? So many Hispanics, so many Asians, any number like that?
The vast majority are Mexico and Central America. I don't think I have the exact numbers, but the numbers are very small from other countries of origin. But there are some from Asia. Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't have it off the top of my head.
And we had some very direct suggestions of how this board can be active. Dan, you suggested, supportive DACA, supportive of the DREAM Act, supportive of Senator Feinstein's blue card legislation. Other ideas, you mentioned a few, Abigail, as well.
Right. I have found that letters from commissions, boards, can be very impactful. I would recommend that you maybe look at a few of the sample letters that other organizations or boards and commissions have sent. These letters tend to be very bipartisan and unique in language, and I'm happy to show you a few. Recently, we had some of the cities in Tulare County city councils unanimously approve sending letters, so I do have a few examples.
Great. We'd love to see that. And it was very helpful to see the bipartisan support of your local legislator. This is the most important thing that we can do, I think. Other questions for our panelists before we invite them to join us for some strawberries and lunch? Bryce?
Thank you so much for highlighting this critical issue. I was wondering if, I am very hopeful that a solution, something long-term and something that will hold, will come from this. Renewal of DACA, pass the DREAM Act, or both, are they an overlap, or is it one or the other, and we promote both? Or how would you characterize? And then I am really pleased that, of course, Senator Schumer and Speaker Pelosi have been active in these issues, but they have I think been effective in bringing solutions forward and maybe making more progress than maybe some others. And your thoughts on that?
On DACA, unless the administration changes its position to have renewals stop by the 5th, we're not going to recommend anybody apply anymore. So no one can renew. There won't be any initial DACA. Should the administration change their mind, the implementation time for something like the DREAM Act takes time. So should that happen, they've got a couple of days, then we would certainly encourage individuals to ensure that they continue to apply for DACA renewals so that they have some type of protection against deportation. And I think one of the big issues that we're seeing during the Obama administration, there were certain deportation removal priorities. So we were able to advocate for specific individuals when they didn't have a criminal background. Now we're seeing that it's fair game. You know, individuals are getting stopped, and we have not been able to stop them from getting deported. And many of the individuals that in the Central Valley, especially, that we've helped were farm workers who were stopped on their way to work in the early morning. This is low-hanging fruit where ICE knows where undocumented workers are going. And so that's a big concern. So we want to make sure that individuals have the protections that they need. But obviously, implementing the DREAM Act also will take time. So what will happen with those individuals that lose the protection of DACA as their DACA starts to expire? Absolutely. Absolutely.
I'll say something about it. I think your question is also more of sort of a political question of what could or might happen or what's important to push for, right? And there's a number of DREAM Act bills that are floating around. Some, like the one from Senator Tillis, is maybe not the best way to do it. It's a 15-year path to citizenship for Dreamers. But the Trump administration could very easily push back the date on DACA if they wanted to, as part of some negotiation or as part of a deal or as part of a way to buy more time for senators and House members to come up with some sort of a deal. And of course, this is all intertwined with the politics of comprehensive immigration reform, or what the cost is for getting DACA from the Republicans. I mean, it was recently reported that the White House came out with a wish list of what it would want in exchange for DACA or for a DREAM Act, and it's a long wish list of enforcement type stuff. Border security, E-Verify, those sorts of things, and so it starts to get messy the more you start thinking about what an actual deal looks like. So we do need both. I think they can complement each other, legislation and DACA. But again, if Chuck and Nancy can convince Trump to push back the date, that at least buys some more time. But it is difficult when you think about what the House will sign on to in this, in terms of a deal. It really is hard to see a deal happening that quickly and easily.
Could one of you or all of you clarify for us the DREAM Act, DACA? So the DREAM Act is this umbrella that includes DACA? Please explain that.
Sure. So the original version of the DREAM Act is, I think, more than 10 years old. It was introduced by Senator Durbin, and I'm not sure who else, but he was the first sort of person to put it out there and push for it a long time ago. And then it got, it was included in different versions of comprehensive immigration reform that have been negotiated in the Congress over the years since then. But there are, it's become sort of the umbrella term for bills that target this population, and and they vary widely in terms of how long you had to be in the United States, what year you came into the United States, what a path to permanence or citizenship looks like. There's sort of 3 or 4 different bills that are floating around. Maybe Diana knows a little bit more about them, like the one that came out from Senator Tillis recently, which was sort of a more extreme conservative version. But the DREAM Act has sort of become an umbrella for the different bills that come out to target this population. Some would just maybe target just who has DACA now,
But there is no one DREAM Act.
No, there's multiple versions floating around now. Like there's Durbin and Senators Durbin and Graham have their own version. There's sometimes you hear talk about a clean DREAM Act, which would just be just for that without anything tacked on in terms of enforcement. I think that's all. Stop there. I don't know if you want to.
Yeah. No, and the DREAM Act specifically, I think, is really the path to citizenship is much quicker than the other bills that are out there. But it's also, and this is really key, because in order to be able to have a member of your family be able to get immigrated, and you can help them as a lawful permanent resident or as a citizen, you know, you have to be able to have that type of status. So with the bill that my colleague here is referring to, you would actually have conditional residency for like 10 years. You wouldn't even be a permanent resident for over a decade. So this would really impact the dynamic of family immigration and being able to keep families together. So that's a huge concern. And so you really have to dig into the details to really understand the broad impact that it has on communities and the families.
Any final questions? Helene, yes.
My question's for Javier. You talked about the people in the fields and what their dreams were for their children, and then you talked also about the need for more farmers. Are people really actively thinking about staying in farming with all that's happening?
Absolutely. I mean, I just like to say that my employees and my crew is not solely made out of Latino. I mean, I have Hannah, I have Tujash, I have Francois, I have Raquel. Those are all from different countries, from America, from a couple other countries. There are many college students from Harnell that their goal is to stay in the ag industry, because the ag industry, thanks to a couple of large farming operations like Taylor Farms that has developed a beautiful building in Salinas that's giving these kids an opportunity to get involved with ag and using technology and these other things. We need all that. We need kids that understand science, soils, all the technology that it's been developed and it could be utilized in the ag industry. And there are some others that perhaps they're not so, their goal is not really to get involved with technology so much, but stay more like Javier, like hands-on and really understand the ABC or how you plant a seed or a strawberry crown and see a child eating the strawberries 4 months later. It's beautiful. So you have a diversity of different skills of these kids. And the ones that they all need to be legal. We all need to be legal to be able to do the stuff that, whether it's to apply for a loan, whether it's to go somewhere else and get some more technology instructive course or something, or visit some other farmers somewhere on the other side of the country. So we need to make sure that we have the legalities that are needed for them to achieve their goal or whatever they might want to do within the ag industry. And yes, nobody is either making more land, and very few new farmers are starting new farms. The big guys get larger, and the smaller guys keep going away because of those things. I'm one of the very few, I'm really blessed, that can achieve a goal of staying in business, having my own independent label, and making a difference. And I want somebody else to do that. Again, I'm not spring chicken. I'm getting old. Working 7 days a week at stuff. So, muchas gracias.
Can I add one thing to that? He's absolutely correct about the importance of being legal, whether it's legal residence or just that word legal, because in our communities, you will constantly see immigrants come into your communities. That's not going to stop. The difference between having a legal status and not is whether or not people choose to live in the shadows. When people are undocumented and are always running and fearful of being deported, they're less likely to apply for a job in a big ag farm like yours. They maybe will go take piecework or go out to the local hardware store and see if somebody needs help to work for a day and support their families that way. If they have some type of legal status, even if it's just a temporary residency or a permanent resident, they are more likely to want to go out and work in our farms.
I think Nancy and Jenny.
So thank you for bringing that up. Maybe, Mr. Costa, you could answer this question about legal immigration quotas. Is there any leverage that can take a look at how skewed the system, the legal system is right now about who we allow in?
So do you mean in terms of permanent immigrants that come in, or do you mean temporary foreign workers like the guest worker programs, H-2, H-2B? Permanent. Right. So we really do have, we're sort of, the United States is a little bit different than other developed net immigration countries in terms of the share of people we bring in based on, for economic reasons or for family-based reasons. So the way our system is set up is about 65% of the permanent visas that are given out every year go to people based on family ties. Those are immediate relatives, spouses, and children of U.S. citizens, and some categories that have smaller numbers and very long backlogs for people who are extended family members, like siblings of U.S. citizens, siblings of green card holders, and those have very long backlogs for certain countries. And the numbers are small, but it's a 4 to 20-year backlog for people from Mexico and the Philippines who want to come in through those family-based categories. And then on the employment-based, we have 140,000 green cards a year out of 1 million total. And those are broken up into 5 different preferences. And about half of those 140,000 actually go to the spouses of employment-based immigrants. So the people that are coming in through that pathway is somebody coming for a specific job, or in some cases, if you're extraordinarily qualified, you don't have to have a specific job, but mostly they're people coming in for a specific job that an employer petitions for them to come into. And many of them actually, a majority actually, are already in the United States on a temporary visa, like an H-1B visa, working in the tech industry. And then they can transition while they're here. But the employer does pretty much control the process. And so different proposals around immigration reform have discussed how to how to balance the system out, or to have different proposals. Some of the proposals that were on the table in 2013 were creating new pools of green cards for employment-based green cards, and it would have had a point system to sort of prioritize who could stay and to create pathways for people who were here on visas already to go into this, what was called merit-based green card system. The proposal that's out right now from Senators Cotton and Perdue that's gotten a lot of attention is called the RAISE Act. Not a good bill in my opinion. What it would do is cut the total number of green cards in half over the next 10 years. And it would mainly do that by cutting out the number of family-based immigration visas. It would cut the extended family categories. And it would keep the employment-based categories the way they are, but it would create a points-based system to prioritize people who had more education, more language skills, and were younger. And so those are sort of the proposals that have been out there. I think it's definitely a valid policy debate to have about what the balance looks like in terms of family-based green cards versus employment-based green cards, and how we structure that. I think some of the proposals that have been coming out from the Tea Party and the Trump administration and Cotton and Perdue are more about cutting numbers and keeping out people who were from other countries. But it's certainly a debate to have, and some of the stuff that's even in that RAISE Act has been part of comprehensive immigration proposals in the past, but those have included compromises like legalizing the undocumented population and clearing out the backlogs of people who have been waiting decades in some cases for permanent residence.
Thank you.
Jenny.
So I just did a time check and I realized that we're short on time. So I'll table my question and maybe ask it at lunch. But what I did want to say is thank you to all of you guys for the work that you're doing. It's clear that all of you have passion. Mr. Zamora, I think it is fabulous that you were able to come here to speak to us. Your story, your passion, your heart is refreshing, and I'm sure just as refreshing as the strawberries that you brought. So thank you so much for being here, and thank you all. It was really great to hear from all of you. Thank you.
Could I just briefly update?
Yeah.
Could I briefly update my answer to Board Member Montoya? Just in 2 seconds. I have the numbers in front of me now. So for Mexico, it's 548,000, which is 79% of people with DACA. And then the number 2 country is El Salvador, 25,900. That's almost 4%. And Guatemala, 2.5%. Honduras, 2%. Peru, 1%. And then every country, well, just about every country is on the list. There's just about someone from with DACA from just about every country, but everyone else is 1% or less than that after those countries.
Excellent. And once again, thank you on behalf of all the board. We really appreciate that. And please join us for strawberries and lunch. And we have extra lunches for everybody in the audience. So Josh prepared it. And we will meet back here, please, at 12:45.